This is the standard offer agreement and escrow instructions for non-residential. As you may all know, we publish three varieties. One is this contract, and one for vacant land, and another one for multifamily, 5 units or more. They're all pretty much structured the same way with some nuances for the property type. But so in talking about the 10 topics, one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is this a purchase and sale agreement? Is it an option? Is it a contract? What is it? So the purchase and sale agreements have a series of due diligence contingencies. And the way the contract is structured is that the closing date for the escrow is a number of days after the actual or deemed satisfaction or waiver of the buyer's contingencies. So the way the contract is set up is that the buyer has a quote unquote free look during the due diligence period. The buyer can disapprove, and the earnest money is refunded to the buyer, and the parties walk away. Years ago, in 2010, the Supreme Court decided the Steiner versus Thexton case. And in that case, the buyer contracted to buy a 12-acre piece, buy 10 acres of a 12-acre piece. The buyer was supposed to do this parcel split at buyer's expense, and the buyer could cancel the contract in buyer's sole and absolute discretion. After the parties signed the contract, the buyer spent about $60,000 and completed most of the approval for the parcel split. Then the seller decided that, no, this is not a contract, rather it's an option in favor of the buyer. And since the seller wasn't paid a separate consideration by the buyer, that it was not an enforceable agreement and the seller could revoke it, which is what the seller did. Then Steiner, the buyer, sued. The case worked its way up to the California Supreme Court. And the California Supreme Court said, yeah, the contract is called a purchase contract, but we're going to go past the title and we're going to look to see what the contract really functions. How does it function? And the fact that the court noted that the agreement was in fact an option contract because only the seller was bound while the buyer retained full discretion to withdraw from the sale. And the buyer's initial promise to seek approvals might have been illusory because initially buyer hadn't done anything, hadn't spent any money, hadn't spent any effort. And the court noted that the express language in the contract overrode the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Ultimately, the court ruled that the option was an irrevocable contract because there was sufficient consideration, and the consideration was the substantial performance provided by the buyer. That was the bargain for consideration that the parties had a meeting of mind about. And that's the reason that the buyer spent significant amount of money and went through and did 75 to 90% of the parcel split work was done by the buyer by the time the seller revoked the contract. And the court noted that that was the party's bargain for consideration, and the fact that the buyer subsequently provided that bargain for consideration cured the defect and made it a binding contract. And the court also noted that the parcel split benefited the seller, who was retaining the 2-acre piece that it could then subsequently sell. So after that case came down, the contracts and the AIR contracts were revised to add the section 4.4, which you'll see in a lot of even tailor-made contracts that are prepared by lawyers. It basically says that the escrow is supposed to release $100 of the deposit, of the buyer's deposit, to the seller as an inducement for an independent consideration for seller entering into the contract with the buyer and giving the buyer the contingency period to do due diligence. And this $100 is not refundable to the buyer, but is credited toward the purchase price at the closing. So this is like an insurance clause in the contract to make sure that a disgruntled seller can't come back and subsequently say, hey, because this contract really gives the buyer a free look, this is an option, it's not a binding contract, and try to get out of it.